So Donald Trump is a revived personality. Donald Trump has an aqidah.
It doesn't, when it comes to the Quran, it doesn't mention memorization. It's a mind-boggling thing. I think these days, it doesn't talk about it. It talks about tilawa, of course, properly. It talks about one of the things it mainly focuses on is al-amal bil-Quran.
Even if, let's say you live in some random neighborhood in Ohio or Kansas, right, where there's no Muslims around you, you're living in the 21st century. You have access to the internet. You're able to connect and network with Muslims.
There's Muslims in Ohio, by the way.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad.
Ohio.
Allahu Akbar.
Go ahead.
I thought it was just corn. I thought it was just cornfields and I show speed, but I guess not.
Always staying a student, right? No matter how much you think you've learned, or how much you've gotten to a point where you feel like you know more than everyone else, continue to stay a student and continue to learn, simply because the one who knows Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot be like the one who does not know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. قُلْ هَلْ يَسْتَوِي الَّذِينَ يَعْلَمُونَ وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ.
To show the ummah that Islam has the solution to our problems through its political system, through the khilafah, through its economic system, through the khuruj tax and all these different ways, and whether we collect the jizya and how these processes go about and how we build and support a society, because those systems aren't in place today. And without those systems, to your point, Hayyan, the world is in cripple. The world is in decline. The average Muslim says, I'm a Muslim, but then he might go and get a mortgage. And you'll be like, well, you're not a revived personality. How are you revived? Because you're going against what Islam says.
You yourself, look at yourself. Are you familiar with the Sahaba? Can you name the 10 promised Jannah? Can you name 20, 30 Sahaba? Can you name the major events in the life of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and the lives of the Khulafa Rashideen?
Sumayya radiallahu anha is willing to sacrifice when there's no example before her. No one has done this before her. Bilal radiallahu anhu is willing to have boulders put on his body and say Ahadun Ahad, Ahadun Ahad, Ahadun Ahad in front of his, slave owner, in front of his master. Based on what knowledge does he have? Based on what Quran does he have memorized at this point? It's true conviction. It's true conviction in these ideas, and it molded their personalities from day one. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back, dear brothers and sisters, to another episode. This is episode number 4 of the Ummah's Revival podcast. And inshallah, you've been enjoying the past few episodes. And we're excited to bring you another episode today with 2 of the brothers that have been on the past shows recently. We have with us Brother Muhammad and Brother Zaki. Assalamu alaikum, brothers. How are you guys doing today?
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah. Good to see you guys.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. So, inshallah, both of these brothers don't need an intro. Mashallah, they're both very active in the Muslim community, especially with the youth, and myself included. And so we'll go right into the topic, and then we'll kind of break from there. Everyone can share their thoughts. But the topic or the agenda I wanted to be focused around young Muslims, Muslims our age in their early 20s to late 20s, early 30s even, young professionals, people in college. I think a lot of Muslims in this group, recently, they've gotten this inspiration or this motivation to become stronger and better Muslims. And I feel that some people may not have a ton of direction on, okay, what do I do with this motivation now? I have this motivation. I want to be, the best version of myself, from an Islamic sense. But what do I use? Where do I go? Where do I find the direction that I need? And so inshallah, we're going to unpack this whole idea, from the different brothers, their different perspectives. And it's not to say that there's, one right answer. So inshallah, we'll all share, our different perspectives. And I will start with the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. So it's narrated in Sahih Muslim. And I'll just mention the first part. But the hadith starts and says that the strong believer is better and more lovable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than a weak believer. The hadith continues and it says that obviously both are loved by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But I want to unpack the first part of this hadith, and it should motivate all of us to want to become stronger Muslims, to want to be the best Muslim that I can, to be seen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the best possible way, with my deeds in the best possible condition. And so I'll let, you guys chime in right now. What do you guys think, about this hadith? What do you guys think about the topic overall? I know both of you interact with people our age, younger and older than us, that have this similar sentiment, right? So go ahead, tafaddal, brothers.
Zaki, you want to go first?
Bismillah. Bismillah, brother. Your background is much more beautiful than mine.
Inshallah. To be honest, the first thing that came to my mind when you mentioned the hadith is kind of almost the opposite of maybe the direction you were kind of taking it of, right? The first example I thought of was the example of Abdullah Mas'ud radiallahu anh, when he was a Sahabi, of course, in one of the earliest Sahaba, and he had a huge impact in Quraysh when he used to read the Quran. Of course, we know the stories of him, going out and openly reading the Quran, reading Surah Al-Rahman, and being beaten up for that. And then, going back and saying, I want to go back the next day, even though he has no tribe. And even though Sahaba know that he doesn't have anyone to protect him, he still volunteered for that task. And then on top of that, also we know that he wasn't the strongest or built the same way as Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anh, or Hamza radiallahu anh, etc. So yeah, when we talk about a strong believer, the first thing that comes to my mind is a strong commitment to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and like this azima, this strong understanding that I know the akhirah is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I know that I'm here in this dunya as a test, and I'm here to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the best way I can, and I'm here to uphold justice. So that's kind of the first thing I thought of when I heard the hadith.
That's a great point. Just to build off that, I was recently actually reading Surah Rum, right? Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's talking about the Persians and the Romans, the Byzantines, right? And how they will be destroyed, right? How it's only a matter of time before the Muslims will rise and they will rule. And at the time when this ayahs were being revealed, the Muslims, they were being subjugated, they were being persecuted, they were being boycotted. And I mean, if you open any Sirah book and whether it's Mullah al-Mawdudi, whether it's Ibn Kathir, you open any of these books and you see the conditions of the Muslims in Mecca at that time, it was reprehensible, right? Nowadays, I know we like to, obviously, they call them first world problems. And that's why that's what they really are. They are first world problems. Not to, minimize or mitigate those problems. Yes, they do exist. We do have issues in the West and around the world today, but the Sahaba were genuinely tortured and persecuted, like Muhammad said, because of their commitment to the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when Surah Rum was being revealed and the Sahaba, they're sitting in front of the Kaaba and they're reciting these ayahs, the Quraysh are quite literally laughing at them. They're quite literally laughing at them, saying that, well, like, look at these followers of Muhammad. Look at these people who are, first of all, they're breaking, the entire family lineage, religious values that we've been having, and they want to destroy our idols. They're calling for the worship of oneness. They're proposing radical ideas, right? But for them, they considered them radical ideas that were not within the worldview of the Quraysh at the time. And they're proposing these ideas and they're talking about these giant empires. Meanwhile, they cannot be able to support their own community. And despite this, the Muslimin of that time, they still had the will, they had the grit, they had the understanding and the vision that there is a greater objective for them as Muslims, right? Because they looked at their current condition and they understood that this is not the end for us, right? Even if we do not attain our goal, even if we do not attain happiness or pleasure in this dunya, they knew that the akhirah was the life that waited for them, right? Because they understood. There's many hadith that talk about this, right? There's one very famous hadith in which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, "Ad-dunya sijnul mu'min wa jannatul kafir." This is a hadith that I quote very often when people come to me with problems, when they come to me with issues, whether they're in high school and they're talking about prom and these different activities that they have to avoid, right? Whether they're in college and they're talking about marriage, or whether they have kids and they're having issues with their kids going to school and learning about LGBT, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and all these other, issues that are going on. Whatever these issues are, I remind them of this hadith, that these are the words of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ad-dunya sijnul mu'min wa jannatul kafir. We are in this world as a test, and this test is not supposed to be fun. It's not supposed to be rainbows and happiness, and you come home every night and you have the best life and the most luxury. That's not what this life is. When you look at the persecution in Mecca, the Sahaba for 2 years, for 3 years, they were tying rocks to their stomach. That's how bad the conditions have gotten. I know in Ramadan sometimes, now it's easy. Ramadan is in March. It's like a 14, 15 hour fast in the West. If anyone remembers going back home in the summer,
20
when you were
hours.
younger, right? Hayan, you remember, man, going to Islamabad, going to Lahore in like summer of 2014, 15, 16, like 20, 21 hour fasts in the scorching heat. Koi AC nahi laga. There's no AC, no pankha, koi nizam nahi bas. There's a very famous saying about Pakistan, like, ye dunya Allah hi chala raha. And I never understood that till I went there in the summer. Like, it's truly true that this world is being run by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It was so crippled, the infrastructure, but still, people fasted. And even these conditions are nothing compared to the conditions the Sahaba went through. Whether it was, look at the Battle of Badr. We forget that the Battle of Badr happened in Ramadan, right? 313 Muslims who were convicted in their faith, who had the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They were not Muslims, they were mu'min, they were believers. There's a difference, there's a stark difference. They stood in the heat while fasting, while facing the enemy that wanted to eradicate them, and they fought for the preservation of our deen. So to your point, Muhammad, just kind of circle back. I know I went on a bit of a tangent. The point is this, is that you're absolutely right. The strong believer is based on our commitment to the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And especially as young Muslims living in the West, we need to evaluate this, right? Whether you're a doctor, whether you're a lawyer, whatever you are, whatever profession you're in, every few months, you have some sort of evaluation. Your employer comes, your boss, your manager, your supervisor, they come and they evaluate. All right, what have you done in the past week, the past 2 weeks, the past month, the past 6 months? You have some sort of performance evaluation. We need to conduct a self-evaluation and ask, what are we doing for the betterment of the ummah and for our akhirah? Are we living our life in a way that is admirable for a Muslim with the resources and the tools and the knowledge and the accessibility we have today in the 21st century? Or are we no different than the kuffar who are just, go to church on Sunday, fight, and their sins are forgiven according to them, right? Because Jesus died for their sins, and that's good. We'll do what you want, right?
So, Jazakallah khair, both of you. I mean, really strong examples. It's the Sahaba, they are true role models. And I think, if anyone needs inspiration, you go back to, obviously, the Prophet ﷺ, but right after that, the Sahaba, all different backgrounds, all different types of challenges. You can easily relate to them. But I'm going to push back just for the sake of pushing back and, try to see how this conversation goes, right? But I would say that some people, some individuals our age, right? Groups of people in our age group, there's so many distractions in the world right now, especially living in the West, right? You look at social media, that's just one aspect. You look at the society, the way it's designed, that's another aspect. There's fitna everywhere around you. And for a lot of people that don't intellectually understand their purpose in life, that don't understand why they're Muslim, they may be born Muslim and because of their forefathers and their lineage, right? But do they really understand the Aqidah of Islam? And I know that's a heavy question because, I had to, even though I was born Muslim, raised as a Muslim, fulfilled my basic arkan of Islam, the pillars of Islam, right? It didn't click. My religion, my deen, my purpose in life didn't click until I properly studied this, right? I tried to understand, what is the Quran saying to me? What is my purpose in this life? Well, that gave me a sense of direction. That gave me a GPS, a compass, right? To tell me, how do I navigate my life? And I think that people today, they aren't necessarily looking for this compass, right? Or they're not told to look for this compass, right? And I think, Zaki, I know you're active in the Muslim community, Muhammad, you as well. All of us get the chance to give khutab and halaqat in the masjid and stuff. And I think this is a big responsibility on our shoulders, that we get Muslims to understand that this is a very important aspect of our deen, to understand why we're even Muslim, right? Or to understand the basic foundation of Islam.
Yeah, I think, look, sorry, Muhammad, I just one quick point. I'll let you go. I know I'm a professional yapper, but look, Hayyan, when we came to Chicago, and we were traveling some years back, we were talking about going to some steakhouse, I think, right? And we were all so excited, like, oh, we're going to go to a Brazilian steakhouse and they're going to have unlimited meats, like this, that, the other. And it was such a good idea, right? Everyone was so excited about it. Now, imagine if every single day you had steak, right? Eventually, you'd be like, oh, man, I'm over it, bro. Like, yeah,
it's normal,
dal
normal.
de do, like, it's going to be like lentils and rice at a certain point. So, unfortunately, that's what's happened with the Muslims in the West. We've almost become kind of like Islam.
Well, I think Muslims everywhere, right?
Yeah, everywhere, definitely. But especially in the West, to your point, right? Life in the West is very comfortable, right? At least in the Muslim lands, you still have financial and economical and social, like you have genuine issues. In the West, the issues are, and I will say this, a lot of the issues in the West are fabricated. They're legitimate issues, but they've been fabricated due to the inability of the leadership of the ummah to provide legitimate solutions and answers for these issues that we're having.
What do you mean fabricated? What do you mean fabricated?
Like the marriage crisis, right? the marriage crisis is a fabricated issue. There's absolutely no reason why 30, 35-year-old Muslim men and women are unmarried, right? This isn't, first of all, this isn't normal, right? You look at any civilization, right? This isn't a normal thing that for it to be the norm. I'm not talking about the outliers. Of course, there's outliers. Your marriage is part of your rizq, and that's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No one is denying that. But the fact that it's become a normal thing for guys to say, oh, like guys, you'll meet them in their 30s. Like, yeah, I'm still working. I want to buy a house and I want to do this and that. And then I'll think about marriage. It's like, Akhi, what have you been doing for the 15, 16 years so far? Hey, you know, like, I know you're not praying tahajjud every day, you know, so these are issues that are fabricated, right? They're fabricated issues.
I get what you're saying. I don't know if fabricated is the word I would use, but I understand where you come from.
It's self-induced. Maybe that's a better word.
Sure.
But like if like, there's a hadith about this, right? That when people make the conditions of marriage harder, there's gonna be fitna, right? So I think that's an important point, right?
So I think it's Muhammad. I know you want to talk. I'll give you a second, but I think this is driven by an identity crisis, and I'll leave it there. Go ahead.
So yeah, to go back to original point. When we think about people being lost in this dunya and them kind of losing like this commitment to the deen, or maybe we could say like not being able to taste the sweetness of iman or able to see the practicality of iman, right? Not to push back on your pushback, but at university we have like a dawah booth, and we speak to Muslims, non-Muslims. So we have like the Muslim part is more speaking about like issues of the ummah, raising awareness for these issues of the ummah. And then for non-Muslims, it's of course talking about da'wah, Acquainted of Islam, calling to Islam. And subhanAllah, just last week, actually, there were so many non-Muslims, Christians actually usually, who came and like we would just like as they're walking by, we would stop them and be like, hey, real quick, do you have like 2 minutes to talk about, Islam real quick? We have this booth and we're trying to talk about religion and, your purpose of life, etc. So, and then of course you carry the conversation from there, like, okay, are you Christian? Are you atheist? What's your background? You get into the conversation. And what you noticed when you asked people this question of, are you religious or do you see religion as a central point in your life? If you ask that as like an opening question, right? You'll see a lot of them, especially Christians, unfortunately, a lot of them, it's not really there. For them, they're like, yeah, when I was a kid, especially in the college age, when I was a kid, we used to go Sunday church, but it never connected with me. I never really felt committed to it. I never felt that connection with it, right? So then, of course, almost 100%, and even when they're forced to be there, it's like they're waiting to go. You know what I mean? They're not there because to get something out of it. You see what I'm saying? So when you continue the conversation with them, though, when you ask them why, you lead them down this truth, this hard fact that their religion doesn't address every single part of their life, and they don't look at religion as a solution to the 3 main questions that a human needs to ask, right? The questions of where did I come from, what am I doing here, and where am I going, right? I think your point goes back to these 3 questions, and your point goes back to understanding the Aqeedah of Islam, not just as al-Iman billah, wa malaikatihi, wa kutubihi, wa rusulihi, wa yawm al-akhir, wal qadr khairihi wa sharrihi, not just these 6 pillars, but understanding the Aqeedah of Islam is a foundation for where my thoughts come from. And from there, my behavior gets shaped by these concepts. So when I have that outlook on Aqeedah of Islam, then it becomes much more practical. Like to go back to the example of the Christian, when I told him, I was like, Islam tells you how to even walk into the bathroom, right? And like it's on a small personal level, right? On an individualistic level. But also it tells you how to govern an entire society. Like he's shocked. He's absolutely shocked. He's like, so Islam is part of every single part of your life. It's not just, go on the weekend and, you talk to God on Sundays and after that, you're just like, all right, let me go live myself. Right? When you have that perspective on religion and on Islam specifically, because Islam, again, we say, if we were more accurate, it's not a religion, it's a deen, it's a way of life, right? When we gain that perspective on Islam, then it becomes more active and more practical and tangible in my life. And then therefore, I see its sweetness of Iman in my daily activities, and I see the practicality of Iman in addressing my day-to-day problems. So yeah, I think that's a point to consider.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that, I know you're talking about non-Muslims, right here, the interaction with Christians and atheists, right? One thing I think that we struggle, or they struggle with, right, is that they don't see Islam being implemented on a ideological level today, right? So it's not there as an example for them to see it. Historically, you would expand the Islamic, borders anywhere. You would see the people of that native land, they immediately see how Islam is being implemented on all aspects of society, all aspects of human affairs, as you just mentioned, right? And when you see that this level of justice, this level of mercy, this level of organization, this level of, lack of biases, right? This is not something that can be humanly created. This is something that's divine from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Of course, it's humans that implement it, and we know that humans are subject to mistakes, but you still see that there is a level of, there's a level of, I don't want to say divinity, right? But there's a level of pureness to this, right? That you can attest to. And then the other point I wanted to mention is that with Muslims, the example that you gave of non-Muslims, I think it's applicable today to Muslims as well.
100%.
Being forced to go to the
100%.
masajids, being forced to learn the Quran,
It's like a cultural,
being
traditional
forced to, exactly. And you have these cultural expectations that become more important than the religious expectations. I mean, I can't tell you how many people I know that, and I'm not saying this as a bad thing, right? Just explaining what reality is, that how many people memorize the Quran, and after they've memorized the Quran, it's like, I've checked this box and I'm free to do anything now, right? And they go on all sorts of directions, right? I'm not saying that should stop anyone from memorizing the Quran. You should always memorize the Quran as much as you can. And if you're forced to, that's still good, to memorize it, but there should be a purpose behind it as well. And I think that's what, Muhammad, you kind of brought up, right? There's these three essential questions that every human being should ponder about. And I mean, Zaki or Muhammad, I don't know if you want to take a stab at it, but how do you answer these questions? How do you make sense of this? And, this is the first main theme that we want to discuss, right? What is our purpose? And I'll just say one more thing, is that when Muslims want to get closer to their deen, the number one thing, in my opinion, is that they have to understand their purpose in this life.
Yeah. I think I'll go ahead and take a stab at it, and I'll let you go after Zaki, inshallah. To answer your question, your question is a very fundamental question about answering, like your purpose of life, right? And if we move with the assumption that the person understands that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the sole creator, that he understands that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is the prophet and the last prophet, and that the Quran is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, proving all of this rationally, and upon that establishing the Acquainted of Islam. If we move with that assumption, we see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran tells us very, very clearly, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, that I have not created the jinn and the ins, the devils in mankind, except for worship. So if we look at the Quran, it tells us very, very clearly, this is my purpose of life. This is my goal. And if we look through the Quran and you read the Quran, you'll see different themes, right? And these different themes portray the same meaning as this idea of your purpose of life is worship, right? So, for example, Allah commonly in the Quran talks about the glad tidings of Jannah, of paradise, and how the goal of a Muslim should be paradise, and his goal should be to avoid hellfire, right? And how his goal should be to, for example, on a more practical level, jihad fi sabilillah. This is something that's mentioned in the Quran very, very commonly, right? It's one of the best forms of ibadah. So the reason I'm mentioning these different themes, right, and of course speaking the truth, standing for the truth, etc., these many different themes in the Quran all fall within this one ayah of وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. And the reason why I'm mentioning these different themes is because we commonly take this ayah and we put it in a place where it's not supposed to be. We take this ayah and say, oh, I was created for ibadah, therefore ibadah is my personal worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's my personal connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore, I'm going to, put all my effort here and neglect the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through interacting with society. So I think the aspect that's missing for Muslims, or the reason why they don't see the clarity in their iman or clarity in their aqidah, is because we focus a lot on the personal ibadat, and this it's not bad. This is actually good. We should focus on it more, actually. But our personal ibadat should not make us neglect the fact that we have a responsibility towards the rest of the Muslims. And just to mention like one small thing that came to mind when you're mentioning how Islam, like non-Muslims, it really, this is really what it is. Non-Muslims are deprived of seeing the implementation of Islam and deprived from seeing Islam as a way of life, as a rahmah al-alameen, as an actual mercy for mankind. So they miss that system, they miss that way of life. So they don't see the purity of Islam. I was giving a Nawawi session, so we're going through like the 40 hadith of Imam Nawawi, and we got to the hadith that says, "Umirtu an uqatila an-nas hatta yashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa anna Muhammadan Rasulullah," until the end of the hadith. So it's a longer hadith, but essentially it says, "I'm commanded to fight the people until they say la ilaha illallah Muhammadan Rasulullah." There's many different narrations, and then after it says, "وَيُقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَيُؤْتُوا الزَّكَاةَ," and they establish salah and give zakah. فَإِذَا فَعَلُوا ذَلِكَ عَصَمُوا مِنِّي دِمَاءَهُمْ وَأَمْوَالَهُم إِلَّا بِحَقِّ الإسلام وَحِسَابُهُمْ عَلَى اللَّهِ تَعَالَى, at the end of the hadith. So, and if they do that, عَصَمُوا مِنِّي, they've made safe from me دِمَاءَهُمْ وَأَمْوَالَهُم, their blood and their money, except with the right of Islam. وَحِسَابُهُمْ عَلَى اللَّهِ تَعَالَى, and their account will be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the reason I'm mentioning this example is because we're going over this hadith in a university setting, right? In this hadith, make no mistake, it's talking about jihad. It's talking about jihad being prescribed as the method of the state to carry da'wah. This is what it is, right? And we see, like, I go through a commentary by someone named a scholar, Hanbali scholar, Imam Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali, rahimahullah. And he has in Jami'
You don't have to say someone. You don't have to say someone like
course.
it's a random person.
Of course, no, it's a big scholar. I don't know if you guys are familiar, that's why. But it's a really, really nice commentary, very, very nice commentary. But in that commentary, right, he goes over, this idea of jihad and how people, and of course gives the example of Abu Bakr and fighting the apostates, etc. But the reason I'm mentioning all of this, right, is because this idea of Islam being spread through the state and through jihad, is a command on Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and of course on us to be carried until the end of time. It says, "Umirtu an uqatila an-nas," I've been commanded to fight the people, so everyone, right, until they say 1, 2, 3, and until they accept the rule of Islam. If we think about it, right, from again a situation where we're coming from a secular society, and the average Muslim grows up without this confidence in his deen. He grows up in a way where these are taboo topics that you don't want to talk about. The reason why, again, is because their aqid is not clear. When they hear وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, when they hear that I've been created only for worship, their mind instantly goes to salah, to zakah, to Ramadan. If Ramadan coming up, fasting, that's it. Rituals, right? When in reality, 100%, when in reality, the Prophet ﷺ, who used to worship more than us, much more than us, right? The most perfect human being, the best of creation on earth, right? He knew this ayah. The ayah was revealed to him, and he embodied this ayah better than any of us could. Yet he still went on all of these conquests, right? So the point I'm trying to make to put this all together is that a Muslim cannot truly see the practicality of his iman or the sweetness of his iman until he practices it from all different directions. If you're going to leave everything else that iman requires but focus on the rituals, then of course you're going to complain that Islam is ritualistic or that Islam is not practical to me. And you might, just like you said before, might end up like the Christian. Versus if you're someone who takes Islam as a complete way of life and genuinely Islam is on your mind and solving your daily problems every single minute of the day, then you'll see that clarity, that sweetness, because you approach iman from all of its directions.
Yeah, quickly I'll just mention that the problem is that if someone doesn't see Islam comprehensively, they're looking at the ritualistic aspect. When it comes to tackling worldly affairs, they're going to adopt a different aqidah or a different way of life to approach those problems, and that's when your life is going to go haywire, right? Dr. Ranjum, I'm sure you guys both know him. He's a dear teacher to me as well. We were talking about this yesterday, and he said that the secular Muslim is in the worst boat possible because he's not earning the ajr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala completely, right? Because he's abandoned what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed for him in one aspect or in a huge aspect, right? You're only taking the ritual aspect of your deen. You're disassociating the political aspect and so much more, right? That Allah Ta'ala doesn't dictate how you live your life. But then if you're living as a secular Muslim, you're kind of like wishy-washy, right? You're not going to be able to succeed how the true atheist or the true capitalist does, right? Because he adopts his aqidah fully. You know what I mean? So you're kind of in between these. And unfortunately, I think this is why you see the situation of the Ummah, right? Where you have people that love Islam, that love Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, but it doesn't translate to the progress that we're all looking for, that we always had. Zaki, anything to comment on? Anything that Muhammad mentioned, or the original question also, about purpose?
Yeah. No, I think Muhammad, mashallah, he hit the nail on the head. Just one point I would add is I think especially in the West, specifically to our reality. I know today we're talking more so about the young men of America in the West, especially, right, and the issues that they face. I think one of the biggest issues that we're facing is this unprecedented rise of these isms, whether it's capitalism, secularism, socialism, right? All these different isms that are an ideological attack on the Muslim mind and on the Muslim aqidah, right? So, for example, secularism, right? What is secularism? And this is something that a lot of Muslim men, even men, I would say, even people who are fathers, people who should know these things, people who Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam refers to as shepherds of their families, right? People who should be the shepherds, who should be the leaders of their families. You ask them what is secularism, they're blank. Unfortunately, this is just the reality, right? This is the grim reality we live in. People do not understand what these existential crises that Islam is facing, these attacks that are upon Islam, what these are. So what is secularism? Secularism is simply the idea that your political life and your personal life, or your spiritual life, if you want to call it, should be completely separated, right? There should be no meddling between those two things, or as more commonly referred to, the separation between church and state, as they say in America, right? Is that there should be a separation between whatever the Bible, the Torah, and the Quran says, and what we enact in our public laws. And this is something that most people, if you ask them, even Muslims, you ask them who don't know about secularism, they'll be like, yeah, that sounds fair. Doesn't sound wrong, right? But then you ask them, right, is, for example, in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He commands us as men to tell the believing women to cover themselves, right? So, for example, inshallah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all daughters so that we may unite with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Jannah, right? But the one who is given a daughter, it is fard on you as a father to tell your daughter to wear the hijab, right? This is a political action. This is not a secular action. This is not an ideological act. This is a political action. You are telling someone how to live their life, right? And to the Western mind, to the secular mind, this is like the most dangerous thing in the world. Like, oh my God, how could you say that? Like, meri jism, meri marzi, oppression, this, that, whatever. But then you ask them, like, okay, why do you wake your kids up for school? Right? Your kids, why do you wake them up for school, right? Like why don't you let your kids do drugs? Like why not? It's their body, right? Just let them, let them go crazy. What's the problem with it? And I mean, honestly, a lot of these kuffar nowadays, they sponsor these programs for their kids. They have no issue with it. But as Muslims, we should hold ourselves to our standard. And even these, like you said, these secular Muslims who are on the wrong boat, they don't have a clarity on these concepts. And I think it comes down to one point, building off what Muhammad said, just a more foundational issue that we have is the reason that people don't know about secularism, the dangers of it, about feminism, about LGBTQ, about all these different issues that can attack and distort someone's iman and destroy someone's Islam, is because, like you said, Hayyan, they do not have a comprehensive idea of what is a deen. If you ask them, Islam is a deen, what does this mean? They'll tell you, it's a way of life, and you have to be nice to people, and be nice to your neighbor, and listen to your mom, and go to the masjid, go to Mecca on the Hajj, walk around the Kaaba 7 times, and this is Islam. And then you open the books of Sirah, right? You look at the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You look at the life of the Khulafa Rashidun, radiyallahu ta'ala anhum, and you see that their entire life was with one mission, was to progress and spread Islam, right? This was their life's mission, was to show that Islam is the dominating, Islam is the superior way of life. It is not capitalism. It is not secularism. It is not socialism. So the point that I'm making is a lot of Muslims nowadays, when you ask them when they think of Islam, they put Islam on the same level of Christianity or Judaism, right? With all this interfaith garbage that goes on nowadays, that Islam and Christianity, it's the same thing, right? Just they're different paths to the same route, right? You're going to the same place. La hawla wa la quwwata, right? Because they say that Islam is what? It's just morals and values. But that's not what Islam is. Islam has a comprehensive political system. It has a comprehensive economic system. It has a complete educational system. It has an agricultural system. Muhammad, to your point, right? You talk about entering the bathroom. Islam tells you exactly how to clean yourself. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he taught the Sahaba not only which hand to clean themselves with, not only which finger to clean themselves with, but what part of that finger to use to clean themselves. Right? And to your point, Muhammad, if a way of life has an answer to such a minute issue, something you would not even imagine, like someone could think about, right? How could it not have the answers to the problems the world is facing today? So yes, you ask a Christian, what is the economic system of Christianity? They'll stare at you like, Jesus died for your sins and bless you in the Holy Father and the Holy Spirit. And you're just like, okay, fine, man. Like, move on with your life. But you talk to a capitalist, right? You talk to these people who are actually enlightened, right? These are revived personalities, right? These are the people who pose a danger to the Islamic way of life. And these are
Why do you say they're revived, Zaki? I feel like people find that interesting that you said a capitalist or an atheist person, or a Christian person that believes in capitalism is revived. Why is that?
I'm trying to think of an example that won't get us banned off YouTube. So let's go with Donald Trump, right? He's more of a acceptable personality in today, like, give or take, right? Fine. So Donald Trump is a revived personality, and let me explain what that means. What that means is Donald Trump has an aqidah. Yes, I know this is a shock to many people listening that even the kuffar have aqidah. I know we think of aqidah as, Ashari, Maturidi, and he's this and he's that, and he's from the subcontinent, and he's a grave worshiper, right? But the worldview is what? The aqidah is your worldview. It's how you, like Muhammad said, where did you come from? Where are you going? What is your purpose? This is your worldview, right? And even someone like Donald Trump has a worldview. He has an idea. He has these concepts of what he is meant to do in this life. Someone like Donald Trump, his only purpose in life is to strengthen the United States of America and to make as much money as possible while doing it. These are his two goals in life. So the reason we say he's revived is every single action he does in his life is connected to those two objectives, right? When he runs for president and he implements these tariffs and he continuously supports and he openly calls for the elimination, for the genocide, for the extermination of the people of Palestine, right? This is because he is trying to further the interests of America, because he's a revived personality.
So you're saying his behavior, his actions, they're driven by his concepts, his thoughts, his ideas that link with his worldview. And unfortunately, I think both of you have alluded to is, unfortunately, we as Muslims have a gap here, right?
Hayan, just to like clarify it, just build on that for like very briefly. You're absolutely right. There is a gap. And the reason the gap exists, in my opinion, this is just my own personal analysis, is because a lot of the Muslims don't even know, like I said, what a deen is. You ask them, what is the economic system of Islam? And they say, we don't know. And which is why they end up pursuing and calling for these other systems like democracy, whether it's capitalism, and because they don't know anything else. Unfortunately, they don't see the actual physical manifestation of the Islamic way of life anywhere in the world today. And so they resort to the only option they have. They don't have any ulterior vision. They don't have the vision like the Sahaba had. And we can't blame them either. There's no blame on them, right? We don't point fingers at these people. We don't. Because at the end of the day, they don't know better. It's like a child, right? A child, when he touches something he shouldn't be touching, you don't yell at the child, you teach the child. So similarly, the issue that we have today, it's our responsibility to show the ummah that Islam has the solution to our problems through its political system, through the khilafah, through its economic system, through the khuruj tax and all these different ways, and whether we collect the jizya and how these processes go about and how we build and support a society, because those systems aren't in place today. And without those systems, to your point, Hayyan, the world is in cripple. The world is in decline. The average Muslim says, I'm a Muslim, but then he might go and get a mortgage. And you'll be like, well, you're not a revived personality. How are you revived? Because you're going against what Islam said.
If I can add one small thing, Hayyan, real quick.
Go ahead, Muhammad. Yeah.
Not to push back what you're saying, it's like 100% agree, and I see what you're trying to say. But one interesting perspective to think about, right, is if we go all the way back to Sumayya radiallahu anha, and we're all familiar with her story and her sacrifice, and her commitment to Islam, right? If we think about what was revealed of Islam at that point in time, of specifically of the Quran, is very, very little, very, very little. So we see that, and of course, although we see that she committed her life to Islam, she became the first shaheed, right? And she was given the option, of course, to uh, to have a way out of this torture and to stop is to just turn her back on this deen. But she committed to it, and she stuck to it, right? The reason why it's profound is not just a lesson in courage, but it's a lesson that it's not necessarily knowledge or the amount of knowledge specifically. It's not the amount of knowledge that is going to create a personality that's Islamic. Rather, it's the pureness of taking that knowledge and understanding it, right? So, for example, even if someone isn't knowledgeable on the different systems of Islam or isn't knowledgeable on the intricacies of Islam, if he understands this core principle that, like you said, Islam is a deen, it's a way of life, even though I don't know how Islam takes care of this part of life, I'm sure it's there. And all I have to do to solve that part of my life is to go and seek it, right? And when you say La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, that's the same kalima that made Sumayya radiallahu anha stick to La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah and die on that path is the same kalima we have now. But the difference
Muhammad,
is these understood it clearly.
No, I agree with you, and I think that's the point that we really need to address.
I was just about to say, I think that was the most important point right here to mention, because yeah, Sumayya radiallahu anha is willing to sacrifice when there's no example before her. No one has done this before her. Bilal radiallahu anhu is willing to have boulders put on his body and say ahadun ahad, ahadun ahad, ahadun ahad in front of his, slave owner, in front of his master. Based on what knowledge does he have? Based on what Quran does he have memorized at this point? It's true conviction. It's true conviction in these ideas, and it molded their personalities from day one. And so the question I was going to ask you guys is, you have a Muslim that comes up to you after a Jummah khutbah, or a Muslim that's listening to this podcast right here, and he's like, wow, you guys are right. You guys are, giving me hope that I have a purpose now. I have something to live for. I have some sort of direction in my life. Where do I go, Muhammad? Where do I go, Zaki? What's the first 2 or 3 things that I do? And I'm looking for tangible, practical, short things that someone that's listening to this podcast can write down. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Here's what I'm going to go do after I'm done listening to this podcast. Here's what I'm building my plan.
I think the first thing you do, and this is the first thing I recommend to everyone, is we talked about the concept of self-evaluation. The first correction that needs to be made is your company, right? The people that you surround yourself with, that's the absolute first correction you need to make. I know we don't like to say, but the reality is a lot of the Muslims, especially in the West, they don't pray, right? They're very estranged from their deen, whether they're having issues with, whether it's they're not able to get married and they're falling into some major sins, whatever the issue is. The first solution that I give everyone, the starting point we can call it, is find a group of friends, go to the masajids, go to these Islamic institutes, find Islamic activities around you. And even if, let's say you live in some random neighborhood in Ohio or Kansas, right, where there's no Muslims around you, you're living in the 21st century. You have access to the internet. You're able to connect and network with Muslims.
There's Muslims in Ohio, by the way.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Allahu Akbar.
Go ahead.
I thought it was just corn. I thought it was just cornfields and I show speed, but I guess not. But no, the point is this, right? Is there's no excuse living in the world today for the company that you surround yourself with, right? There's the very famous hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam describing the man who goes to the perfume shop and the man who goes to the blacksmith, right? And that's not more, that could not be more true than today. Because we've all gone to school here, we've all gone to university, to college here, we've all worked here, we've lived our life surrounded by kuffar. Whether or not you accept it or not, your friends, the people you surround yourself with, your peer, your coworkers, they have such a profound effect on you, on the way you speak, on your activities. And I'll give you the simplest example. I remember there was this one brother who came to me once and he says, I have a friend who never prays. This guy was like 18, 19 years old. He says, I've been friends with him since childhood. I have never seen this guy pray in my life. I said, bring him to one of our gatherings. We used to have these gatherings in one of the brothers' backyards. We would barbecue. We would just hang out and talk about Islam and just try to better ourselves, just somewhere for the guys to get together and spend some time together. When the time for Isha came, there was 15 other guys there. Now, if this guy was at home or if he was hanging out with Billy John and Marcus and Jamal, I doubt he would have even noticed Isha came and went. And that's just the reality. But he was with us, right? Everyone went one by one using the garden hose. This was the middle of winter. It was like 25 degrees outside. They made wudu with freezing water, right? And we prayed salah and jama'ah. And he did as well. Now, am I going to sit here and, profile him and judge him like, oh, he did this to show off and just to, keep up appearances? No, of course not. No, the reality is we were able to get a brother to pray who would otherwise not have prayed. What is a bigger victory than that? That's the starting point, right? Is if you're struggling with your iman, evaluate your friendships, evaluate the people you spend your time with. And that should be your main objective. Because it's very difficult, man. It's impossible, right? It's impossible. Even you look at Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Muhammad, to your point, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was rahmatan lil alameen. He was the greatest man to walk the face of the earth. And even he had a group of Sahaba. He had companions. He had friends, right? He had people who helped him with his mission. And this is what we need to understand. It's not a one-man job. It takes a village, right? There's the famous saying, it takes a village. And it does. It takes a village to ground yourself. It takes a village. It takes a group of personalities, a group of individuals, like-minded individuals, to help yourself stay on the right path. And I'll end with one more hadith before I give Muhammad the chance. I know I went on for a while. But there's the hadith where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says that the believer is a mirror for the believer, right? And when you think of a mirror, when you're looking at a mirror, you're able to see imperfections that you otherwise wouldn't see. When I'm sitting away, like 5 feet away from this camera, I can't really see whether my lineup is clear or not, whether there's a hair here or a hair there. But when I'm up close in a mirror, I can very clearly see where the line goes. I can see the imperfections. If you have acne, you can see where the pimple is, where your dark mark, all these things, right? You can clearly see everything. So the same way, the believer is a mirror for the believer. When you spend time with other believers, when you spend time with other like-minded Muslims and people who have a revived personality, people who have a clear objective in life, clear priorities in life, you're able to simultaneously correct yourself. Because just sitting at home all day thinking about what should I do, what should I do, what should I do, you're right, Hayyan. The viewers will sit here for the next 6 months and they'll be unable to do anything. Why? Because they're stuck alone. But we need to remember we are not alone. We are an ummah of 1.9 billion strong. I promise you there's a group of 5 people out there who are ready to be friends with you. Even if you're Hayyan, look at Hayyan, he found us, right? So if Hayyan can find us, guys, anyone can find a group of people who are willing to help you better yourself, help you become a better Muslim.
Yeah, I think that's like probably the most important point. But to build off of it, after you find those people that you're gonna hang out with, or maybe even you can look at it like this: a condition of how to pick these people or find these people or where to find them is to look at where you're spending your time, and not just having Muslim friends, but having Muslim friends you do Muslim activities with, and you spend your time like a Muslim with, right? So and that's unbelievably important, because if you look at it, that anyone who's trying to better themselves, whether it's from an Islamic perspective or someone is just trying to gain a new skill, right? You have to spend time for that skill, right? And if you waste time and you don't allocate time for that skill, you're not going to be able to gain that skill, right? Or it'll take you longer to get to that point, right? So spending time with friends, but spending time with friends, like you gave the example, they didn't go to the backyard purely because they were going to go and have fun and that's it. And there's no meaning behind it. There's no reminder of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala behind it. Rather, they're going, and as they're reminding themselves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I'm sure they were having fun too, right? So the second point I think that's very, very important to remember is how you spend your time. So practically, for example, surrounding yourself with the masjid, surrounding yourself with Islamic activities. So when you have hangouts with your friends, the hangout is revolved around some masjid activity or some Islamic activity or something where you remind yourself of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you're bettering yourself as a Muslim and increasing yourself in knowledge. And that's, I think, a third point. I think you're looking for 3 points, Hayyan. The last one I think would be knowledge, and continue to increase in knowledge, and always staying a student, right? No matter how much you think you've learned or how much you've gotten to a point where you feel like you know more than everyone else, continue to stay a student and continue to learn, simply because the one who knows Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot be like the one who does not know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the one who knows the deen cannot be like the one who does not know the deen. And the Quran says, قُلْ هَلْ يَسْتَوِي الَّذِينَ يَعْلَمُونَ وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. That how can they be the same? the ones who know and the ones who do not know. إِنَّمَا يَتَذَكَّرُ أُولُو الْأَلْبَابِ. That very the ones who remember are those who really think and really hear and they ponder and they think about these ayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with a heart that's longing for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So seeking this knowledge of the deen, and it can be formally through, a degree or going to masjid events and spending time with the Quran, contemplating on the Quran, and like Hayyan mentioned before, not necessarily memorizing it, but contemplating on it. And maybe a small tangent before I end off. You're reminding me of the hadith about ad-din nasiha. The ad-din is an-nasiha. Verily, the religion is nasiha can be translated to advice, but it has different meanings. So in one of the things that when Rasulullah was asked to who, Ya Rasulullah, one of the things he mentioned was to Kitabillah, to the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, and that's why nasiha does not necessarily mean advice, right? So, nasiha to the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how can that be? It's because nasiha here means ikhlas, means sincerity to the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And again, when reading the commentary of Imam Ibn Rajab Muhammad rahimahullah, you'd expect, like from a contemporary perspective these days, you expect that, the commentary is going to talk about memorizing the Quran and the virtue of memorizing the Quran and its tilawah, etc. But actually,
Muhammad, you can't see the screen, but I'm holding the book up for the viewers.
Oh, really?
So go ahead.
Perfect. Oh, you bought it? The English version? Nice.
Yeah.
That's fine. Nice. Bro, by the way, that's actually if you were gonna ask the question,
It's a great book.
That's my favorite book. If you're gonna ask the question, that's my favorite book by far.
We'll get to it.
But yeah, there's a prelude.
Get too excited.
But no. If you check that chapter on nasiha, it doesn't, when it comes to the Quran, it doesn't mention memorization. It's a mind-boggling thing. I think these days it doesn't talk about it. It talks about tilawah, of course, properly. It talks about one of the things it mainly focuses on is al-amal bil-Quran, acting upon the Quran, and of course, it's tadabbur, right? So acting upon the Quran is implementing in your life and following it in your life and taking it as huda, but also the tadabbur, which is like the contemplation of the Quran, right? And of course, there's a famous statement by Hassan al-Basri. He says that, the Quran, it was sent down to be acted upon, but my people took it as its recitation is acting upon it, right? So that's just a small tangent that, again, moving into Ramadan coming up in the next week and a half, depending on when this video is released, that's something to consider. That not only focusing on tilawah of the Quran in Ramadan, but also tilawah at a pace that allows you to do tadabbur and contemplate upon the Quran. And again, there's a whole subject within itself that why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam prescribed a certain number of days that a person should go through the full Quran, and it shouldn't go below a certain number of days. So that person has ample time to reflect upon the Quran and get the fruit that's supposed to come from it, not the tongue exercise.
Really good points, Muhammad and Zaki, both of you. Jazakallah khair. I won't share my perspective because you guys both mentioned the exact same thoughts that I have. What I will say, I'll answer the question a little bit differently. If I had a Muslim come up to me right now, after the masjid talk or something like that, and he came up to me very sincerely asking me, I'm struggling with, this, getting closer to my deen, whatever, I would say, and if this person is very sincere, wants to actually transform his life, right? I would talk about the purpose as we talked about, in the beginning, right? What is your purpose in this dunya? Are we living in this dunya for this dunya? Or are we living for the akhirah? And I think this is first step for me. I know we all have slightly similar but different perspectives as well as approaches. That's okay. We all should have different styles and approaches. That's what makes us unique. So I appreciate both of your guys' comments. But that's what I would do. I would talk about the purpose first and try to get this person to understand why am I going to take out or carry out any action that I do. And if we look at the ayah that we talked about in the beginning, right, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not create insan or jinn except but to worship him. How does this translate into every action that I do, right? Does that mean it's okay for me to record this podcast? Does that mean it's okay for me to eat food? Does that mean it's okay for me to walk? Or do I have to be, praying salah 24/7, right? And I think when you break it down like that, a person thinks, okay, maybe it's not that it's not reasonable. If salah was commanded 24/7, we would do it 24/7 because it's coming from Allah Azza wa Jal. But the idea, as we mentioned in the beginning, is that our whole life is ibadah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How we dictate every single action is ibadah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I think this is, when I learned this aspect, right, it was very eye-opening for me. And I don't think people look at it from this perspective, but every single action in our lives can be broken down into 5 categories, right? Something that's commanded, fard, something that's forbidden, haram, makruh, something that's disliked, mandub, something that's recommended, or mubah, permissible. Every single action. And, this was kind of like mind-blowing to me to like look at it from this perspective. But when you look at it from that perspective, you refer to the Quran and the Sunnah, and you try to see, okay, every action that I'm doing, what is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala going to say about this action on the day of judgment? And when you think about it from that, I promise it changes your approach, and, from the smallest action to the biggest action, right? Am I allowed to record this podcast? Am I allowed to watch this TV show? Am I allowed to be in a certain setting? Am I allowed to do this? Am I allowed to do that? How do I, revive the ummah? How do I tax the people, right? As like you were mentioning, Islam has an economic system. So I would start with this, overall purpose and drive it from this perspective. What I will ask your guys' help on is, we kind of mentioned, Muhammad, you mentioned the 40 hadith of Imam Nawawi and the commentary by Ibn Rajab. What books do you guys recommend to people, or what sources of information, knowledge should a person go to when they're wanting to get closer to the deen? And I will say that people have different modes and mediums that they prefer. Someone may like listening to YouTube podcasts. Someone may like reading a book. Someone may like an audio book. Someone may like going to a lecture, from the masjid. And so there's different things, but I'm curious what you guys recommend to the people. Any books or any shows, anything that you recommend?
In terms of book, I think we have to mention the Quran first. I'm assuming you mean like other than just the Quran. The reason I mentioned the Quran first, though, if I can just go on this point, is because it's about the way you approach the Quran, and the way you build off the Quran. So, and I'll come back to this point in a second, right? To answer your question directly, which books specifically? The Seerah of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Pick up whichever Seerah. You can do the Sealed Nectar. You can do Muhammad Ghazali has a Seerah. Sallabi has a Seerah. These are all in English, by the way. These are all good Seerahs, right? And pick up the ones that are at least like 500 pages minimum, 600 pages, and work through it slowly. And of course, the full Seerah is much longer than that. But a good, comprehensive, doable Seerah book is the most important thing, I think, to increase a person in Iman. But and of course, following after that, the Seerah of Abu Bakr, of Umar, of the Khulafa Rashidin in general, and you'll see like a very clear picture of what Islam is supposed to be like in a person, on an individual level, and also in society. But the reason why I mention Seerah books specifically, whether it's Seerah of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam or the Seerah of the Khulafa Rashidin, it's because it's an implementation of the Quran. Because the same Quran that we recite 5 times a day minimum, right? It's the same one that the Prophet ﷺ used to emulate. He was a walking version of that Quran, and that the Sahaba used to implement in their lives. So when we read these stories, we see how to implement the Quran that we read. But if we don't read the Quran in the first place, we're not going to know that this was a driving factor, right? And to drive home this point, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبُّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ أَمْ عَلَى قُلُوبٍ أَقْفَالُهَا. That do they, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asking like a rhetorical question, or like a question to make a person think. أَفَلَا يَتَدَبُّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ. Are they not going to do tadabbur, to contemplation of the Quran? أَمْ عَلَى قُلُوبٍ أَقْفَالُهَا. Or is it upon hearts that are locked? Like you can imagine like a lock, like a master lock on a heart. And if we go deeper into the ayah, and again, contemplate upon the ayah, why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mention a heart? Why does it not mention, you're listening, or you're not actually actively listening, or with your ears specifically? It mentions the heart. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not unlock the meanings of His book to a slave who does not contemplate upon His words. Someone who just reads the Quran and just reads it to go through the motions, or so that his Quran teacher he can recite the page or 2 pages he has that day, or in Ramadan he has to finish that monthly, finish the Quran once or twice, without actually thinking about the Quran and contemplate upon it, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not unlock his heart to understand the Quran. So you have to look at it from that perspective. In anyone who has tasted the sweetness, right? You'll realize the same ayat that you've not just read, you've read multiple times, and you've memorized, and you've recited in salah. You never understood it until you go back and you read it again, and then you read it again, and you think about it, and you contemplate upon it, and you read the tafsir. You read why asbab nuzul. You read why it came down. You read the ahkam that are derived from this ayah. You read the ahadith that are related to this ayah, etc. And it'll end up.
Ahmed, how do you recommend contemplating?
So this is a very good point. I think contemplation of the Quran depends on the level of the person we're speaking to. So, like, let's say divide into like two answers. So, number one, if you're someone who speaks and understands Arabic, then it'll come easier because it's in your language. And the way to do that is very simple. You read the Quran, and you take your time with the ayat. Take your time, and any word you don't understand, and most of us probably have the Quran with the tajweed, the book in it, with the colors. That one also has the meanings of the harder or the bigger Arabic words on the side, in Arabic as well, translated in Arabic. And you read those words and you think about why is Allah using that word. But also, why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used that word in that context for that specific purpose, and why he didn't use another word, right? So these are all different, and there's books written on like principles of tadabbur, of how to contemplate the Quran. Is there one principle, two principles, three principles that the scholars wrote. But also number two, of course, reading tafsir. Tafsir is very important because you don't want to take the ayah and implement it incorrectly. So that's one of the dangers of contemplating on the Quran, is that someone might apply their own bias to the Quran, which is not what we want to do. Now, if someone speaks English, hey, I think you better answer that, but maybe like read a translation, whatever translation is the most accurate.
I'll share my thought. I was curious if you had this perspective or not. I mean, I agree totally with what you're saying. Tafsir, very, very important. Ibn Kathir, Qurtubi, Sayyid Qutb's tafsir, even in the shade of the Quran. These are all, I think, very good. Maududi also has a tafsir, right? So I think these tafsir are also, they put the Quran into the context, like you said, and you can feel like you're there with the Prophet ﷺ as these ayat are coming down. And that just changes the perspective, right? One other thing that I like to do sometimes, and I like to recommend, is that a lot of the verses that were revealed in Mecca, they talk about Iman and belief in Allah Azza wa Jal and the signs that He has revealed for us to contemplate about. And I think there's no better way to recite these verses while looking at these signs, going into the nature itself, looking at the mountains, looking at the sky, the birds, that the stars, all of these creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala He created, they are signs for us. They're signs all around us, right? And when you connect these verses to these signs around you, it just puts you into such a state of awe that you're humbled, right? And I think it helps with that connection that you were speaking about.
Yeah, I think another important point to mention, and maybe close off to this point, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he tells us very clearly in the Quran that the ones who inherit this book, the ones who have this book, who inherit it, there are going to be levels. And hopefully we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from the highest of these levels. But some of us will be oppressing ourselves with the book. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, ثم أورثنا الكتاب الذين اصطفينا من عبادنا, and then we inherited, or we passed down the book to our slaves who we chose. And فمنهم ظالم لنفسه ومنهم مقتصد ومنهم سابق بالخيرات بإذن الله. And from among them are those who are oppressive. ظالم لنفسه, they're oppressive to himself. ومنهم مقتصد, and some of them they're mediocre. They're not bad. وَمِنْهُمْ سَابِقٌ بِالْخَيْرَاتِ بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. And from among them are those who are foremost, and they're at the forefront of all good with the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are the ones who are winning. These are the ones who are rightly guided. And these are the ones who are part of this third category, who يُسَارِعُونَ فِي الْخَيْرَاتِ. They're rushing, competing. وَفِي ذَلِكَ فَلْيَتَنَافَسِ الْمُتَنَافِسُونَ. And in that, the people who want to compete, you should compete in this. Compete in remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Compete in understanding the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Compete in the connection with the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if you think about this ayah, and this is one of the ayat that the Mufassirin and the Fuqaha, they use to show that Iman is levels. Iman is darajat. Why? Look at this ayah. It's saying that the same book is given to people with the same capability, with the same mind to contemplate upon this book, like you were mentioning before, with the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the biggest sign of that which being the miracle, the Quran, the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's the same book, yet some people will oppress themselves with this book. Like imagine if we if we just hear that statement by itself, we're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. They probably just don't follow the book and that's it. But if we contemplate deeper upon the ayah and you put it in this way, it's fascinating, right? Imagine you gave someone a clear guidance, a blueprint for life, right? Something that can only benefit them, right? Somehow, though, this person is oppressing himself with that, right? It's a question that a person's like, how? How can someone oppress himself with such a clear guidance? It's because this Quran can either take you up to the level of being sabiqun bil khairat, of being, foremost in goodness, or it can make you, muqtasid, someone who's doing okay. He's doing his arkan, his five pillars of Islam. He's following the basics, but he's not really doing more than that, right? Or it might take you, waliyadu billah, all the way to the lowest, which is someone who's oppressing himself with the Quran. How? Because he's turned his back on it. Because he has the opportunity to save himself in this dunya and in the akhirah, and instead he chose the worst of this dunya and the worst of the akhirah. So it's a point to remember, especially with Ramadan coming up.
Jazakallah khair, Muhammad. I appreciate the insight about really having this connection with the Quran. I'll mention quickly, some other books that I've found interest in. As you mentioned, look at the commentaries on by Ibn Rajab on Imam Nawawi. And one of the other things that I think historical books are also beneficial, learning about the history of Islam. And one I recommend is Al-Muqaddimah by Ibn Khaldun. I think that's a phenomenal book. Goes over the Islamic history, the Islamic Ummah, the trials and tribulations, but also shows the glory of Islam as well. I think that we should learn, that anyone who wants to learn about, Islam today, get closer to their deen, one of the things that you should learn about is your history and what Islam was able to become and how it was destroyed at the same time, right? And with the reality that we're seeing in Gaza today, in Sham today, I think it's so important to know about Salahuddin Ayyubi, about Muhammad al-Fatih, about Tariq bin Ziyad, about Muhammad bin Qasim. These people that came, much after the time of the Prophet ﷺ, but they were people that carried the same mission. And a lot of us became Muslim or got the mercy of Islam because of these individuals that were able to carry the banners of Islam. A lot of people, unfortunately, don't know their stories. A lot of people don't know who these names are. Or maybe they know the names, but they don't know what drove them to their victories. They were no different than people than me and you. They were human beings created by Allah Azza wa Jal. The difference was that they understood their purpose and their mission in life. Muhammad al-Fatih, at 21 years old, is able to conquer Constantinople because he wanted to fulfill the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that the one who conquers Constantinople, his army will be the best army and their leader will be the best leader. His mother knew this hadith. His teachers and mashayikh knew this hadith, and they made sure that Sultan Muhammad al-Fatih understood this hadith. And they raised him to understand that how do you take everything that this world is giving you and use it for the purpose of Islam. Salahuddin Ayyubi, he wanted to be the one that liberated Al-Quds, to liberate Al-Palestine. These were people that have the same goals as us today, right? And we have the capability, we have the resources. It's a matter of, again, putting that into purpose. So I think learning about these people, about, Salahuddin's mentors, Nuruddin Zingi, and others, I think it's absolutely important as well. One other, I know some people, like as we mentioned, that some people struggle with brain rot or being able to read books. There's audio podcasts, or there's audio siras that are, I think, really beneficial as well. There's the famous AAA Sirah series that people can listen to. Yasir Qadi has a decent Sirah on YouTube. Take with a grain of salt. You have to be able to dissect certain things, but I think he does a good job in comprehending the information, or compiling the information, all of the information that's out there. Sometimes it's a little bit, wishy-washy on how do you put it into context in today's day and age, right? And then the other thing I was going to mention with YouTube, I don't know if you had anything to add on to this, Muhammad, but I was going to kind of go into like what YouTube, other channels that I recommend.
Yeah, just I'll ask one small thing. That's it. When it comes to like books or where to start, etc. A person has to look at himself and see like what level he's at, right? So if someone, for example, isn't familiar with the seerah, is not familiar with the seerah of the Sahaba, and you haven't gone through these bare bones of like reading the Quran with tafsir, of course, and then of course, going through the seerah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the seerah of the Sahaba, then yeah, don't just skip directly to like a fiqh book, right? Or a more complicated book where it's deriving rules, right? And the reason why, again, is because like you haven't gotten to the level where you're going to benefit from that book, but also you'll benefit a lot more once you read the seerah. That's one most important thing. One of our shayukh used to say like everyone should have gone through, should read from front to cover, like front to back. Imagine one whole tafsir. And of
Mm,
course, like a whole tafsir, like imagine that's a lot. Like me personally, I haven't gone through a tafsir front to back, right? But the same also applies to the seerah, and probably actually even more so, more importantly for the seerah, because if you think about it, if you aren't familiar with the seerah, you're gonna have a very hard time, and you're gonna struggle to put stuff into context. So the only thing I mentioned is just for someone to review, for what like the listener, whoever's out there, to review yourself, look at yourself. Are you familiar with the Sahaba? Can you name the 10 promised Jannah? Can you name 20, 30 Sahaba? Can you name the major events in the life of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, in the lives of the Khulafa Rashidin? If not, I would focus on that while, of course, reading the Quran and maintain the connection with the Quran and contemplation of the Quran. And then from there, outreach or go out into books of fiqh or other branches. Yeah. History of Prophet and Ashab.
some other books that just came into my mind as you were talking, and maybe untraditional books, but if someone is really trying to understand the comprehensive perspective of Islam on this world, there are books on the economic system of Islam. Sheikh Taqiyuddin Nabhani has wrote, a comprehensive book on this. Maududi has wrote a comprehensive book on this. There's other, scholars. There's, different organizations today, Ummatics, they're putting, and different, Islamic revivalists that are working on these type of things, right, all around the world, that have put a lot of thought from a Sharan perspective and put together, what does Islam say about the economy? What does Islam say about politics? What does Islam say about the social system? With YouTube being, such a large media platform out there, yeah, I see, a lot of different, we're just almost survival. We're a little nobody right now. But there's people, much more bigger channels that are out there, and a lot of people have, mashallah, very good content. I personally enjoy Five Pillars a lot. They bring, a variety of different guests. Dilly, he does a great job, very sincere in his questioning, and he brings, a variety of guests and a lot to learn from different guests. Muhammad Hijab, he brings, very strong intellectual arguments for, the purpose of Islam or the mission or the aqidah of Islam, right? So I think those are other two good brothers to listen to. Daniel, I think he does a really good job. Daniel Hakikaju, Muslim skeptic, he does a really good job in combating liberalism and secularism. So again, if these are topics that you're interested in, I would recommend you listen to these people. And I'm trying to think if there's anyone else that, like a YouTube.
Adnan Rashid is
Anyone
really
stick?
nice. Adnan Rashid for
Yeah,
history,
Don Rashid does a good job.
especially. I know a lot of
Oh,
times.
blogging theology, Paul
Yes,
Williams.
yes,
He's one of
yes,
my
yes.
favorites right now. MashaAllah, he's a
Yeah.
very good brother, and he brings a lot of different guests. So yeah, those are I would recommend those channels, and then Ummah's Revival if you're curious to hear Brother Zeki and Muhammad talk.
MashaAllah, mashallah.
Zeki, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of on the same boat as you, Hayat, where it's kind of hard to sit and read a book just because that's not something that's in our habit. We're not really used to sitting around. We're mostly on our phones, we're watching TV, we're on our iPads, on our laptops all day. So for me, I prefer watching, whether it's Instagram Reels, whether it's YouTube videos, or even like series. Like one of the first series that I watched
Mm,
regarding was the Omar series, right? The Omar series, as they call it, or the Omar series, take a pick. But depending on the spelling. And the one thing I really took away from that I know a lot of people who I've spoken to about this as well, is, we read in the seerah, we read in the tafsir about the tribal system during the time of the Quraysh, during the time of Jahiliyyah. And I never really understood the system, right? I've gone to Umrah, I've gone to Mecca, I've gone to Medina, I've done ziyarah of these different cities, and I've read many books at that point, and I've watched many videos about like the description of how the tribal system worked, and there was the head of clans, then even within the clans, there were sub clans. You had Dar al-Nadwa, you had all these different like systems or organizations in place. Until I watched the Umrah series, I didn't really understand what it meant. Because what it actually does for you, and this goes back to that point you made earlier, Hayan, is we don't have a practical, living, breathing model of Islam in the world today, right? So just being able to conceptualize and visualize that, and mashallah, may Allah bless the producers and the director behind that series for the khayd that they brought via that, they really hit it on the dot. It's really, truly perfect in the way it displays the struggles of the Muslims of that time. It shows how the social interaction was. And I know earlier you were talking about YouTubers. I mentioned Adnan Rashid, right? I love all these brothers. Muhammad Hijab, Daniel. You hit it on the nail. All these brothers are phenomenal when it comes to whether you're talking about secularism, liberalism. The main reason I really like Adnan Rashid is he's a master in history, and I feel like that's something that's really forgotten about, unfortunately, especially after World War II, World War I, the Sykes-Picot Treaty, the division of the Ummah. The saying goes, right, that the victors write history, right? The history is written by the victors, and that's evident in the world today, right? When you go to the subcontinent, whether you go to the Middle East, people are just completely unaware, the masses, of our Islamic history, right? We don't know the Islamic personalities. Muhammad, like you said, majority of us can't even name 10 Sahabas, right? This is a reality. So I really find that grounding yourself in history and having a sense of belonging, right? Like I belong to this community. I have a rich history behind me. Right? You mentioned Muhammad al-Fatih, right? And how he understood the ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? So having that understanding, that historical precedent before you, it really helps ground you, and it really shows you that it's bigger than us, right? It's not just me, you, and Muhammad sitting here talking about Islam, going on and on about this hadith and that hadith and this idea and that concept. But these things are grounded. These things are rooted. Now, the main issue is finding something that interests you. Now, there's some brothers, right? I know this one brother. He hates books. He hates podcasts. He hates, reading articles. But what he loves is watching lectures, right? He loves watching like college, PhD level lectures. So if you give him like a 4-hour lecture and tell him, brother, give me notes on this, he'll bring you like a whole notebook filled with every single note you can imagine, and his own theories and extrapolations and the speaker and quotations and annotations. That's just what he enjoys, right? Now, obviously, the masses aren't going to enjoy that. There's some people who don't enjoy TikTok, who don't enjoy Facebook Reels, who don't enjoy Instagram Reels or YouTube Shorts. There's some people who don't enjoy books. The true solution is finding a form of media, finding an outlook, an avenue that you can connect to and you can devote time to, right? Because if you can find something that interests you, that's where it really comes in handy. You gave the example of the khutbahs before. I'm sure if I went to Muhammad's masjid and I'm surrounded by brothers from Palestine and Jordan, I'm not going to go up there and start talking about Imran Khan and Pakistani politics, right? It wouldn't make sense, right? Because those people have no interest in that. You would talk to people at their level. You would talk to people of what interests them, of the issues that they have. So similarly, all of us, we need to find something that interests us, because there's something for everyone.
So, Zaki, I agree 98%. 98? I disagree with the last point that you made about going to Muhammad's masjid and not talking about Pakistan or Bangladesh, because
they're going to look at us like we're crazy.
The ummah is one body. The ummah is one body.
I agree with you 100%.
And we have to feel the pain and we have to feel the struggles. And I make it a point, the masjid I give khutbahs at is 99% Egyptian, mostly Arab. And I make it a point that, like, for example, when the situation in Bangladesh was happening, to talk about that, because there is a gap, there is a level of lack of awareness that they have, a cultural disassociation. And same thing, I get the opportunity to go to a different area and give a khutbah as well. And it's mostly Bangladeshi people there. And, I talked about that as well. Like you said, you have to meet people where they're at, but you also have to do the due diligence to give them the awareness that they should have of the whole entire ummah as a large. But I mean, the other point that you mentioned, absolutely, totally agree that everyone has a different, you can't give everyone, a book. You can't give everyone a lecture. Not one shoe fits every single person. And inshallah, if you're listening to this podcast, you found at least one thing that you can take of benefit from, whether it was the books that we mentioned, whether it's just a perspective on life, whether it's the company that you can surround yourself with. It's a different approach, having a podcast or YouTube lecture that you can listen to, listening to tafsir, going in nature and reciting the Quran and reflecting on these verses. Really anything that you take from this podcast, inshallah, you would be able to, inshallah, you'll be able to pick up any one of these habits in the month of Ramadan. And the month of Ramadan is coming. We're less than 10, 15 days away now, and the opportunity, less than 10 days now, right? Less than 10 days exactly. So the opportunity is there. All of us will be looking to pick up new habits, and there's plenty of work for us to do. And by no means, during this podcast that any one of us three thought that we're here better than you guys or than anyone else that's out there. No, this is sincere reflections that we have, and we want to be able to share our advice and share our nasiha. But at the same time, I learned things today from Brother Muhammad and Brother Zaki that I'm going to apply moving forward. So, brothers, any final thoughts before we close today's episode?
No, that's pretty much it. Jazakallah khair. Jazakallah khair. Very
Okay.
comprehensive.
Well, again, Jazakallah khair to the viewers for tuning in on this episode. Feel free to leave us a comment or any other suggestion that you have. Make sure to like the video and share it with your friends and families. Again, we are just starting off the channel, so every single view helps. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts the time that you spent for his sake, and you get the ajr from listening to these brothers right here. And I appreciate both of you guys coming on late at night, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you. And inshallah, we'll talk again soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.